so today, my intervention that I'm going to address with you today is to improve symbol recognition through the use of clickers. So we'll just dive right into this. So I gave a quiz to my statistics students, my AP statistics students, and noticed that they really lacked general understanding of what the different symbols meant in statistics. So they didn't recognize that X bar was a sample statistic, whereas mu was the population mean. So they didn't understand the differences there, so I realized, okay, if I really want them to understand the formula sheets and the problems that are being asked, they really need to understand what these concepts are and which symbols go with which. So my plan at that point was that I was going to review these things as warm-ups. All right, and I'll talk about how I use those as warm-ups here in a bit. The problem is that traditional warm-ups, I might say, all right, number one, X bar, what does that represent? And I might get one person say sample mean, and I don't really get feedback from the rest of the class, which is an issue, because I don't know who's really getting it and who's not. Clickers, for many of you that are familiar, I can use this to preview their answers. I can see everybody's answers. And I know exactly who's getting it and who's not, which ones I need to spend more time on. So I'm able to use those results to immediately remediate anything that they have issues with. All right? So that is kind of the premise of this study. So the purpose then is to make sure that students truly understand this notation, and that should help increase their overall comprehension of the subject. So I'm investigating the usefulness of clickers as an online, real-time feedback system to learn, see if I can improve their scores on symbol recognition. So I had to do a literature review to start this, and I broke my literature review down into two places: the importance of symbol literacy, and then feedback-based learning. So as we know as math teachers, math has its own language involved with it. And unfortunately, a big part of that language is understanding the symbols. If you don't understand the symbols, you're kind of dead in the water. So with its own set of symbols and grammar and vocab, that stresses the importance, especially in statistics when they've never seen these symbols before, and there's just dozens of them. There's also the claim that if students are going to make sense of math, they must be able to learn all of this stuff. And maybe that this is a reason why they struggle with math, is that they just don't understand the notation. That could be one of the reasons that by the time they get them in high school that they are struggling with it. Again, just more emphasis, mathematics is its own written language, it's got its own spoken language, and we have words for all these symbols, but we don't always pair them up. We don't always state the words with the symbols. We just say X bar, F of X, whatever, right? And expect that the students know what that means. And again, they must be able to read, identify, and interpret these symbols to be successful in this course and other courses. And in fact, they have shown that success in the physics class can be shown to be highly correlated with symbolic literacy. There's all kinds of notations in physics too. And if they don't understand that, then they're going to struggle with the subject. So why not in statistics? Feedback-based learning, this is just defined as teachers using technology to monitor student progress as students learn. And it gives informed feedback to shape instruction, exactly what Plickers does. All right? If you're not familiar with the Plickers system, I'll have pictures up here in a little bit showing you how the system works. Feedback-based learning significantly improves students' learning because students know what they need to focus on. So if I can give them the feedback, look, all right, correlation, coefficient of determination, you're still mixing these two up, then the students know exactly what to work on to get those misconceptions straightened out. So this was my research question for this study. What effect does the real-time informative data collection system Plickers have on student recognition of statistical symbols in a mixed grades AP statistics class? Mixed grades meaning sophomore through seniors. All right, so I'm going to get immediate feedback on what the students know and don't know. Immediately remediate their mistakes before they get further ingrained into their systems. And this is also going to stress the importance that they learn the notation and how it's going to affect further comprehension in the class. The goal here is that I will see that Plickers is going to have a statistically significant better outcome on their test scores than just traditional warm-up feedback would provide. So here's my methodology. I took 2 groups. I really tested all 4 classes of my AP Stats class with a pretest. That way I could pick 2 classes that I thought had a similar baseline level. So my treatment group, who got the Plickers intervention, is my Red 1 AP Stats class that consisted of 28 students, 13 male, 15 female, broken down 8 sophomores, 6 juniors, 14 seniors. My control group happened to be my Red 4 class, 26 students, 11 males, 15 females, 17 sophomores, 3 juniors, 6 seniors. So you can see my Red 1 class was a little more senior heavy, my Red 4 class is a little more sophomore heavy. But these 2 classes had pretty much the exact same average score on the pretest. They had the same distribution of scores. So I felt like these 2 would be very nice comparable baseline classes so that if there is a difference in the outcomes, then it can be directly attributed to the intervention. So I gave a diagnostic pre-assessment. There were 15 matching questions, and more or less, I gave them the different concepts that needed to be matched to their symbols. And I gave more symbols than there were concepts. So that way they couldn't just do process of elimination. They really had to know what these different symbols meant. And you can see some of these symbols. Let's see if I can zoom up a little bit for you. Some of these symbols are ones that they've seen in algebra classes before. And so I threw in M and B. Least squares regression line in statistics is A plus BX. Y equals A plus BX. And they're still used to Y equals MX plus B. So they want to call the slope M and the y-intercept B, but the slope is A and the y-intercept is, the slope is B and the y-intercept is A. So there's some confusion there. I can catch them on that if they're still on algebra skills. We had, for population proportion, they use pi. And students still struggle with the idea that pi is 3.14 and not a population proportion. So this really gives me a good baseline as to if they really understand which symbols are statistics related and not other math courses related. All right, the post-assessment is actually identical to this. I just shuffled the choices up. They had the same 15 concepts that they had to match, but the choices were mixed up. Now, using Plickers, if you're not familiar with this, it's an app that is on your smartphone. It's available through Android and iPhone. You can create quizzes on their website. Multiple choice or true or false questions are really the only ones that they're able to handle at the time. Students are assigned their own card. It looks kind of like a square QR code. And on each 4 sides is the letter A, B, C, D, so that corresponds with whatever choice they want. All right, so they turn whichever choice they want, that's the one that faces up. And then I can use my phone with the app installed on it to scan their answers. Each student's QR code looks different, so that way that nobody can just look at each other's and be like, okay, Jimmy's got his turned this way, and I think he's right, so I'm going to turn mine that way too. All right, so they won't be able to know. So and during this, I collect real-time data and feedback on how they're answering. I can see it on my phone which answers each student chose and if they were right or wrong. And then later I can go back and look at an item analysis. So here's a picture of my Red 1 class. You can see their Plickers cards. They're all different shaped. I can print those off from Plickers.com. One is assigned to each student in the treatment group. Again, each one is unique for each student, and it allows you to answer choices A, B, C, and D completely free. Don't even pay for it. So it's awesome. All right, then I gave a series of 3 warm-ups, similar to looking like this. All right, so what I gave them, the first one, this was the second one I gave. The first one just took 5. I had 15 of those possible concepts, and on the first one I gave them 5. And they just had to identify which one it was. And then I also asked them to define what the concept was, just to kind of get that added reinforcement. And then for the second and the third one, I took 5 new ones out of the 15, and then picked 5 from the old ones and threw them in there. So they had 10 this time that they had to identify. Here was the problem that I had. All right, I gave both my treatment and my control group these documents because Plickers was not able for me, I was not able to find out a way to put in some of these statistical symbols that have like the weird accent marks on them, like the hat or a bar or anything like that. So that was kind of difficult for me to do. So for me to be able to give them the questions to use Plickers, I had to give them these documents too. And I think, as you'll see a little bit later on, that this has part to do with influencing some of the results from this study. So for example, this second test I gave, I focused mostly on stuff dealing with least squares regression line, but then those were the new 5, and then my old 5 were mixed up from a previous set. I pulled them from the other 10. So that way they didn't have to worry about just these 5 this time, but I also had to worry about old ones. So they had to keep it fresh. All right. So they got 3 warm-ups like this, given to both groups. Then they had a 4th warm-up where I gave them all 15 symbols, and this time they had to match the symbol to the concept. So before, I gave them the concept. I'd say, sample me. And then they'd have to pick A, B, C, D, which one was the sample me. This time, I gave them the symbol, and they had to tell me what the concept was. So for example, number 1, I gave them the symbol A. They have to be able to identify that that is the y-intercept of the least squares regression line. Okay, so they're working it backwards now too. And they got all 15 for that. Again, both classes got this document. The only difference really was that my Plickers group, my treatment group, answered with the cards, and I could see how they were answering right away. My control group, they just had to, I have a volunteer that would answer a question. And then if they were right, we moved on. And if they were wrong, then we'd stick with it until somebody was able to give us the right answer. And then after the 4th warm-up, I gave them the post-assessment. So this really took us about, with our block schedule, 2 weeks to do. All right, so this is what the app looks like while it's collecting the data. All right, for whatever reason, the app gives us this, on my phone anyways, it gives me this black margins. I don't know why it doesn't use the full screen. I know, Alicia, you use Plickers. Does it do that for you too?
It gives me the full screen.
You get full screen?
Okay.
Do you have an Android?
I'm using an Android.
That's
okay,
probably
so that must be a difference between Android and iPhone then. So, to me though, for me, I'm still able to read it all, no problem. But what will happen is, up here, it says student names with answers highlighted green if right, red if wrong, and gray if I'm still waiting on an answer. So I see all the students' names there, and I can scroll through it. And then it gives me a bar chart based on A, B, C, D, how many people have answered each choice. And then also, I will see kind of highlighted near each of the Plickers cards, I can see the student's name, so it recognizes which student is holding the card, and then it'll be highlighted green or red to let me know if they got it right or wrong. Okay? So I'm getting all of this data all at once. It stores it online, so I can come back and call it up anytime. And this way, too, I know exactly who I haven't heard from. So you can see for this particular question, they did quite well. All right, so my methodology, I give the pre-assessment for both groups of students, and then I looked at the averages and standard deviations, recorded that so I get that baseline data. Gave both classes all 4 warm-ups, as I described. They answered on their own before we went over them in class. Students in the treatment group, again, provided their answers with Plickers cards, and the other control group just volunteered their answers.
Wait, what do you mean by just how did they volunteer their
So I'd be like, all right, number 1, X bar. Does anybody have an answer for X bar? And then somebody, Mr. Jimmy would raise his hand and say, oh, it was B. All right. Then for the group using the Plickers, I'm able to see that real-time data, but I can get more specific feedback and remediation. I took this snapshot from the website, and I can see, the names are right here, the percentage of the questions they got right for that particular quiz, and then I can see which choices they answered. So now I can come back later and I can look, okay, let's see. I can look when I'm given the post-assessment. I see that a lot of people answered, see if I can find one here that has a lot of common mistakes on it. Each column is a question. So I see that for this particular question, a lot of students answered B or C. So what are they getting it confused with? Which symbol did they get this one confused with? And then that will also help me kind of direct my instruction as to which, what I need to tell them, what I need to help them with that feedback. And that's something, that's an ability that Plickers just added here recently, like within the last month or so. Then I give the post-test to both groups after the 4th warm-up. So it's on the 5th class after the intervention. Same test, just shuffled the choices up so that they didn't memorize what the letters were. Again, averages and standard deviations were calculated for both groups, and then we compare the growth between the 2 groups.
I have a question.
Yes?
So did you address misconceptions immediately, or did you take the data and...
Well, and that is something I'm going to address here in a moment. But yeah, if I could go back and change how I did it, there is one thing that I would change that I think ended up affecting my results a little bit. But yeah, for Plickers, what I would do is, all right, they'd answer 1, we'd get an answer, and then I'd remediate that one right away. And then for 2, same thing. Just keep doing that. Instead of letting them all answer what they had, and then remediating everything afterwards.
Like the next day?
Or no, just once everybody had put in their scores. So the problem that comes up with that I ended up having was that when I remediate immediately after each question, if answer 1 was supposed to be N, but they answered N somewhere else, they could go back and change it real quick. And then by the time that I can scan their answer, they've already changed it. So I don't really know if they know that particular question or if it was a second guess. So that is one thing that I would change in the future. So I gave the pre-test and the post-test just a score out of 15. It was right or wrong. I labeled the student proficient if they got at least 13 out of the 15 right. That way that allows for if they just switched to the answers. Like they knew that these were the 2 right symbols, but they didn't put them in the right place. So that would have given them a score of 13. If they did that once, I'd consider that proficient. No deduction for questions answered with the correct symbol instead of the correct letter choice. So some of these I'd get back, and I would notice that for number 12, correlation, instead of giving me the letter that matched the symbol, they just wrote the symbol. So I didn't knock them for that. If it was the symbol, I gave them credit for that. Usually I was able to figure out. I could look at the things that they've crossed out and see which one belongs with what they answered. So here's the pretest data. Remember that there were 15 symbols. All right, both classes averaged 7.14, 7.89, so about 50%. Not great. Okay, but they're pretty similar starting points. All right. As far as my proficiency label, this is working in my control group. My control group was 8% proficient, 92% not yet proficient. There were 2 students that made up that 8%. I don't know, these were just probably particularly studious students that paid attention to this kind of stuff and was on top of it before I had the chance to say that it was a problem. But they still had room to grow. So they weren't perfect. They were 13, 14s. All right, if I look at the treatment group, similar stats. 7% proficient, 93 not. The two students that made up that 7%, one of them just mixed up the two choices. So, you know, the one that really caught people a lot was correlation and coefficient of determination. One is R and the other is R squared. So those were easily mixed up by students. One other student got a perfect on the pretest. And this was a student that every time I introduced notation, he would ask me 2 or 3 times, okay, tell me again, what does this mean? And his notes are very detailed about what all the symbols meant. So he was kind of already on top of his game for that particular group. So, but otherwise, everybody else is pretty much starting at the same place as a class. So again, both classes, similar starting points in the class average and percent proficient. Their standard deviations were almost identical as well. Therefore, if any substantial difference exists between the treatment and control groups, once the intervention has been applied, then can be attributed to the intervention itself, rather than just doing the warm-ups. So, post-test averages shot way up for both groups. Oddly enough, the treatment group didn't score higher. All right, they saw similar and substantial growth. Treatment group averaged a 13.75, which is about a 6.5 point increase, and the control group averaged a 14.19, about a 6.3 point increase. I've got my theories as to why the treatment group actually was outperformed by the control group here in a minute. Looking at proficiency, 92%, so this is almost a complete flip-flop, all right? With the control group, pre-test, 8% were proficient. Now post-test, 8% was not proficient. So complete switch. We had an 84 percentage point increase, and that 8% that were not proficient, this is in my control group, or just people who missed 2 symbols. They got, and then maybe missed one more. So they missed a couple by switching. So they're right there. They were right on the cusp of being proficient, and they just missed it. So we almost had 100% proficient in the control group. Treatment group, again, a few more. I think there was one more labeled not proficient than in the previous class. So an 89% proficient, which is an 82 point increase from the pretest. 11% not proficient. These were 2 students in this class that were pretty much absent during the entire intervention process. So they did grow, but not by a lot. So it's like the ones that they missed on the pretest and that they were there to remediate were the ones they improved on, but they only improved by a couple. So, you know, their frequent missing of class had probably contributed to that. And then if I look at, this is my control group, just their pre and post test data. So what you're supposed to see out of this is that everybody did grow to some extent, and you can see most of them. All right, my lowest score looks like it was an 11. So that would be one of those 2 people that just mixed up maybe 2 or 3 symbols. 3 or 4 symbols, I suppose. But a lot of people made substantial growth. Student number 5 here started off with a 2, ended up with a 15 in the end. So that's showing me that the remediation, or just the practice of it, definitely helped improve their recognition. This is the treatment group. And I told you here that there were 2 people that were frequently out. Be student number 23 and student number 28. I had one student here, number 7, he got a 0 on the pretest. All he did was there were 15 choices, and it perfectly spaced out this way, where he could write, I don't know Mr. Doe. So obviously I knew that he should get a 0 on that. It did turn out that one of his O's was in the correct spot, but since he had 3 O's
That's funny.
Since he had 3 O's in there, obviously
That's true.
didn't feel right counting that as being correct. So I gave him the 0 on that. But he got a 15 in the end.
So for the students who were absent so much,
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't it have been almost more accurate, since they didn't receive the whole remediation, to just exclude their pre-test and post-test?
Well, and see, so here's the issue. This is the statistician coming out of me. this was my sample. I can't decide who gets represented in my sample and who doesn't after I've collected the data.
Well, right, not certainly not at this point, but I wonder if at like that third day we're like, wow, kid X has not been here for 3 of the 4 things already. Then even before the post test, if it wouldn't have been possible to just say like, hey, I'm just going to say right now I'm not going to include this kid because he hasn't been here to receive anything. He hasn't been a part of the control group or the.
And there were honestly some kids, because this class was a class of, this is my treatment group. It's actually a class of 29, but I had one student who was not there for the pre-test, missed a couple of the intervention days, was there for like one intervention day, came in, had no clue what was going on with all of it, and then was there on the post-test day. And to me, just for the sake of keeping this experiment moving,
Right.
I didn't want to try to catch him up. Now, I mean, I will eventually, take the time to make sure that everybody's understanding these symbols and I've remediated them, but I didn't include them for purpose of the study. And yeah, you're right, Tyler. A similar thing could have been said for these 2 students who were absent frequently. I could have maybe tossed them out, but it's just, statistics, and you don't really get to choose.
Right. I just felt like I've seen, because I'm in the middle of the same thing that you're doing right now. I'm doing it for my master's class, and a lot of it seems like in a lot of the research study I've seen, if a student like mid survey or mid experiment, whatever, something happens that's going to impact the survey, then as long as it's before the actual post test is done, there haven't been any issues dropping them. So I just wanted to know if there was a reason for that or not. So
I just,
you're good. You answered
I chose
it.
my
Yeah,
sample,
you're good.
I just stuck with it. I was kind of hoping that since they knew that I was stressing the importance on it, that maybe they would remediate a little bit on their own too. But I think it was pretty clear they didn't in this case. So what does all this say if I take it all together? Again, both classes saw similar but substantial growth, most likely due to the repetition of practice. The focus on a set of new symbols each day, but mix in some of the previous symbols too to allow them to really repeat the practice on some of those symbols. Now here's what I think actually happened. All right. My treatment group was the first class of the day. And so I could see, based on the Plickers results, which misconceptions they were making. Okay? So then when I got to my control group, which happened to be later in the day, all that's still fresh in my mind. And when I see that, some people think that number 2 should have been R squared and not R, I kind of automatically gave the same feedback, assuming that that was the mistakes they had made. And so, even though they weren't contributing their answers via Plickers, and that I could see exactly how everybody responded, I was preempting it. I was kind of saying, all right, I think this is the mistake you made, so I'm going to give you feedback on that. That was kind of my teacher side coming out of me and not my statistician side coming out of me. So, I really think that influenced my results.
Your actual job.
Right, exactly. So, symbols came up in lessons too. Like, I do the remediation, we do the warm up, we go over it, and then I proceed with the next lesson. If the next lesson had those symbols in them, then I also kind of made a conscious effort to say the sample mean X bar is, and so I would say the concept and the symbol together so that they hear them together. So if I did that in both classes, then that's also kind of affecting my results based solely on the feedback from Plickers. So, I'm glad everybody grew, but I can't attribute the difference based on Plickers alone. And in fact, again, the statistician side of me, we only needed to report on averages and percentages and stuff like that. I went ahead and did a full-fledged 2-sample t-test on this data. My data was their growth, the individual student growth from pre-test to post-test, and then used that data to do a 2-sample t-test. And there was 0 statistical significance in the difference. They were more or less identical, which is exactly, looking at those charts, is exactly what you would assume anyways. So again, I lay out here, treatment group was first in the day, so the Plickers showed me where confusion was, and then I just that influenced my feedback for the control group later in the day, which probably confounded my results. But as a teacher, it is important to stress, everybody did make improvement, even if it was marginal. Everybody did make improvement. So of course I see, as we all know, we as teachers, remediating old material is going to help improve their proficiency of it, increase their proficiency.
And the value of Plickers might be in something other than just student help. You know, if it was easier for you to grade, if you got feedback more immediately,
Right.
like those are things that Plickers can add value to a classroom without necessarily being some massive gain to the student.
And had I controlled myself with the control group
Right.
and not given them immediate feedback that I had assumed would be the same as what they got in the treatment group, then maybe we would have seen the differences more distinctly.
I still have some questions
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
your actual process. So you did after you did the Plickers,
Mhm.
okay, you got your data, and then immediately after you finished all 5 questions, you remediated and then they
It
practiced?
was immediately after each question.
I thought you said, okay.
So number one, all right, which one of these does sample mean?
Right.
Oh, C was X bar. Okay, great. So if they had answered X bar anywhere else in the warm up, then they could change it, and then by the time I got to them where they held up their Plickers card, it would change their answer.
Right, so, okay, so then what was the so how was your reaction to the data different between the Plickers versus the sheets?
And it should
I'm not
have
making a
been.
point. I'm
No,
just asking.
I know.
don't know what you.
It should have been that with the Plickers group that I was giving more extensive feedback based on, okay, I see which ones you're you're confusing, which ones you're switching up the most, and so I can address those needs specifically. Whereas with the control group, the idea should be the only feedback I'm getting from the students is the volunteered answers. And unless a student asks me, wait, I thought it was this one, there probably wouldn't have been that much feedback going between myself and the student. What actually happened was that I knew what feedback I'd given my previous class with the Plickers, and then if I saw that students struggled to get the right answer for number 2, then I probably already had an idea as to why they were getting that answer, and therefore was giving them the feedback that I had from the Plickers class to them. So it's almost, they ended up being the same in the feedback that they got.
Right.
The only difference was that everybody in the treatment group gave me an answer via Plickers.
Right, and this is information that you would not have received had you not used Plickers.
Right.
So in some ways, I'm not hating on your study, but
No.
this is not actually.
I'm not saying that it's worthless or that it's not good or that I didn't learn something from it. You're absolutely right.
No, but I'm saying that, what would really be interesting is that without that, I understand we're all teachers and that's going to come out that I know these are previous misconceptions, so I'm going to address them, no matter how I got the data, no matter what I'm doing for my master's class.
Right.
Yeah.
But what would be more interesting is to maybe have not more interesting, but what I think would actually give maybe more accurate data as to whether, Plickers, in some ways, it's sort of showing that it is actually effective because by the time 4th block came around, you already had information as to, what some of the misconceptions were. Without that, you would have had to go home, grade them, maybe grade them on planning, but I think it would be interesting to see what would happen if your control group was
Truly
first
controlled.
period.
Oh, okay, yeah.
First period.
And that's kind of what
then-
that's
so
kind of
that
what you
means
had
that they
said.
would get-
That's kind of what you had said in the beginning of that was the mistake you wish, looking in hindsight now,
Right.
you recognize that was an issue, and if you had a chance to redo it, that's what you would have switched, that it would have
Yeah.
changed. So you're definitely right that to get a clearer picture, had they been swapped to where you were taking the cold class first, then getting the Plickers data.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. We would have seen who got it.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
something we can address here in a minute.
Right,
we'll-
and you had kind of mentioned that on the last slide of confounding things. Like you had said, I already kind of knew their misconceptions. Because I knew student misconceptions, I just automatically addressed it. I didn't even remember that doing that would probably inherently mess up my own study.
Right.
You had said that.
Right. So.
But you're right, Alicia. It's the same.
So,
Yeah.
and then also, so normally you would have taken, what would you have done with the papers, if you hadn't used Plickers, what would you, let's say it was first period or whatever, or you really controlled for this, you know,
Right.
you really did it statistically.
How would I give them their feedback differently?
How are you getting the feedback?
Okay, so what I probably would have done was that I would have collected their answers, and then while I teach the lesson, and then they would have had time to start on their homework, and during that time I could grade them real quick and kind of just leaf through and see, all right, yeah, okay, I see for number 3 a lot of them missed
Okay.
it because they thought
And then
this,
you would
and then I could hand it back to
immediately
them and address it then.
Okay.
So being able to, with a control group, to do it that way
Mhm.
might have also shown some different results. But we'll have here in a moment. We'll be able to talk about what are things that we could have done differently or in the future. So that's, but those are both really good ideas. So looking at this data or this information here, again, students using clickers did not grow significantly more than the control group as predicted. It seemed like with control group remediating the symbols was enough to increase that recognition. Again, I was giving them that feedback that I got from clickers, so that also would have affected things. The treatment group average percent proficient was lower due to those 2 outliers of those students who were frequently missing class. So that, it's like, oh, the treatment really didn't work then. No, not what I'm saying. So the next step, so this is exactly what I was just getting ready to talk about, is that, all right, what feedback could you give me? What could we think about? How might we do this study differently to verify if clickers really did make a difference? And so, Alicia, you gave me 2 of them, which was one, to have the control group come first, so that they don't, so that their feedback doesn't have a chance to be influenced by the treatment group. And then, sorry, remind me, what was the other one? We said just to exhibit more
one thing I
constraint.
think we both kind of hit on was that, like, adding something to your classroom, even if it doesn't add specific value to student growth, can still add value to the class. Like, if it makes gathering feedback easier, if it makes it to where now instead of grading 80 warm-ups, you have that data and you have it right in front of you and you know exactly who missed what, how, when, why, where. Helping your job to be easier is going to make the classroom better because it's going to help you have an easier time being a good teacher.
Right. So
like the value of Plickers isn't just dependent on did the kids get better if they were using Plickers. It's, did it become easier for you to become an excellent teacher with Plickers being a part of your class?
Right, absolutely, and I do feel like, because again, the reason that my control group jumped up so much is because I was giving them the feedback that I got from Plickers earlier in the day.
Right.
So obviously there is some inherent value to it. I wouldn't have had that immediate feedback with any other method. So we can still continue to use Plickers, and it doesn't even have to be for symbol recognition. With an AP test, we've got to practice multiple choice questions. So I can still practice with that using Plickers and getting feedback on what their misconceptions and how they're answering multiple choice questions could be. And ACT prep in Algebra 2 or geometry or anything like that, it could be used there. I was trying to think, we were saying one other thing. There was another suggestion that you had, I think. We had the control group come first, but just, I guess, exhibit more control with the control group to only give feedback for what I'm giving.
Yeah, but that's so tough. It's so tough to you're doing something that you think is going to help your kids, so you're consciously depriving one class of it. Like that feels weird as a teacher.
Yeah, it does, and I think that's why I had a hard time with that.
Yeah.
So, any other ideas?
What about like collaborating with Chris on it, like 2 different groups, like all of his classes be the control group and your classes be the
Okay, so have another teacher, Chris in this case in my PLC, have another teacher have, say, the control group.
Because then you can have a larger sample size, because you can do it with multiple classes.
Yeah, and you just have to control for where his kiddo started. Right. Well, and how his kiddo started and how your kiddo started. Because every teacher's a little different. If Chris had just been putting a little more emphasis throughout the year on it, maybe his kid started in a higher or lower place.
Right.
Well, and then
but you would be able to control
having
that.
2 separate teachers also introduces other issues that you have to address as well.
Yeah, we'd have to find ways to control for those. But all right, good. I think those are some good next steps or
I also think that, I mean,
variations.
I use Plickers not just for practice on multiple choice, but actually when I see that there's a common misconception, like dealing with proofs, because it's geometry. The idea that if two lines are parallel, that they're congruent, comes up a lot. So I use it to elicit like a conversation between them. So I can see who has it right and who has it wrong. And I might call, it does, I mean, sometimes I might call on a person who has it right and ask them to defend their answer. Sometimes I might call on a person who has it wrong and ask them to defend their answer. And I think sometimes people think like, oh, Plickers is just like, yeah, for multiple choice. But yeah, like it can actually really, bring about some really good conversation and debate, and therefore clear up some misconceptions because the students don't know why you're calling on them.
Right, and that's actually something I have done when we've done multiple choice questions, is because especially with the AP Stats test, how much you read into the question will change your answer. And so I have selected two people, one that I knew got it right, and then maybe somebody who got it wrong that had answered it in a way that was a common answer, a common one that they got wrong, and then I'd have them debate it out, and then we would actually redo the question and see who won the debate, and then see if they were ultimately right. So yeah, I've found that to be a really excellent source or use of Plickers. So definitely. Anything else before we move on? Good. So just a reflection on this activity. Again, you've probably heard me say most of this. Both groups made significant improvements, similar improvements at that. And then also the fact that they had the Plickers questions, the Plickers group had the questions printed out too. Like, I feel like that could have made a slight difference in how things have been if I had just had the questions on the board, on the screen, and that was the only way that they could see it, and then maybe they would jot some notes down for future reference. They didn't have those to go back to, so that could have potentially influenced results. So the only real difference between the treatment groups, though, was that I got individual responses from the whole class with the Plickers. But I gave collective feedback that's pretty similar in both groups. So from this study, can I attribute the improvement to Plickers specifically? Not really, but I also know that the feedback that I gave my control group was based on the results from Plickers in the previous class. So maybe, but I can't, there's no proof of that. Now, action research as a whole, that's what this whole process is called, action research. It's where I'm actually acting on my class with an intervention to make a difference. It does seem to provide a valuable means to assess the effectiveness of an intervention. I did an action research project with my discrete math class last semester, and where I changed the qualities of their homeworks. Half the class got a low quality homework, another half got a really high quality homework, meaning difficulty, challenging. And then I noticed at the end of that unit when I gave them the test that there was a distinct difference in their grades, which that seems like that should be pretty obvious, but I found that there was not very much research that reflected that the amount of homework that they have might affect results, but the quality of the homework, there wasn't a lot of research to back that up. I can see what works best for my students to increase achievement. So I might experiment with several different interventions and find one that my students really latch onto and stick with it. And we as a school are consistently trying to get that little bit more, meaning that little bit to help us meet AMO each year. And so maybe experimenting in the classroom with different intervention strategies might be a help, because we're always right there, right? Maybe just that little bit more will be enough to just bump us up. All right, so it's definitely got good purpose. I've listed some reference here that I made reference to in my lit review, but now we've got to turn to this survey real quick. And again, you've taken the survey, so you know what the questions are like. We've already discussed the results of these and stuff, so this should move pretty smoothly.
Hey, Corey, hang on one second.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop this just in case something goofs with it. That way we don't lose the whole first part.